Ladies and gentlemen, by now, most of you have probably heard Kyle Rittenhouse has been found not guilty on all counts. Not only did Kyle win today, we all did. This is a huge victory for self-defense. It's a huge victory for wanting to take care of your community. And it is pushback against the lies of the media. But we're still not out of the woods. I am very, very happy for young Kyle Rittenhouse that he has his freedom, that he's been proven right, but he never should have gone through this trial. And now, with the not guilty verdict on all counts, the judge has not issued a ruling on the motion for a mistrial with prejudice. The corrupt actions of the prosecutor will go unabated. He will be allowed to do this again. Now, there still may be malicious prosecution, and we are getting strong reactions across the board. But my friends, you need to see the reaction from Kyle Rittenhouse, and there's a lot more we need to talk about. You see, on this day, it is very good news for those that believe in freedom, and it is bad news for those that seek to lie. But we have a new story from reporter Nellie Bolas. Not everybody's a big fan of her, but she wrote how she tried to cover what was happening in Kenosha, and the New York Times told her they would not run the story until after the election. And this is why I say the battle today is won, but the war is far from over. Already, many left-wing personalities, leftist personalities, are condemning this. The ACLU, supposedly the American Civil Liberties Union, not really, is condemning this as white supremacy. Mayor Bill de Blasio has come out and said that these men shot by Rittenhouse were victims, even though after judicial review and a jury verdict, these men were not victims, but they were assailants. And I also have a quote from the significant other of one of the men who lost their lives, Anthony Huber. And I think we need to talk about this quote. It's a good quote. It is. Basically, Anthony Huber was the second man to who have lost his life. And his girlfriend said that she hopes Kyle Rittenhouse finds love. And justice would be him understanding what she lost, not life in prison. And I respect that. I really do. What I don't respect are the many people who have come out clearly still not knowing what this court case was about. Now, I have a lot of friends who are politically left, people I've known throughout my career, and I am surprised to see them saying, I can't believe this is happening. These are not overt ideologues. But when I look at their Twitter responses, I can see people saying, did you watch the trial? I mean, right now on Twitter, not surprised is trending. And it's because people on the left were like, I'm not surprised this is the outcome. Mostly people are saying this because we watched the trial. We knew the state's key witnesses supported self-defense. We knew the state was engaged in gross misconduct and grave constitutional violations. But some people are saying, I'm not surprised because they're like, this country is a white supremacist state. Well, that means the war is not over. But my friends, wow, has liberty been winning? I mean, I've shown you the map of gun control is becoming less and less popular. And I think this plays a big role in what we see here. I think the jurors here, the regular people of Kenosha, they thought long and hard about this. 4 days to come to a verdict. But there is something that needs to be said about that. It's a Friday. They waited until a Friday, the worst possible day for this. Now, perhaps the idea was news events have less of an impact on a Friday. Perhaps. But not when it comes to the political divide in this country. Friday, payday, the weekend, you can expect to see riots. But there is something that many on the left are now concerned about. The Kyle Rittenhouse precedent. That was from Hassan Piker, one of the most prominent left-wing personalities in the country. The Kyle Rittenhouse precedent is that Kyle, who showed up to a violent riot with a medical kit and a rifle, was exonerated, was acquitted when he defended himself with that rifle. And the concern from the left is that many more people will show up armed to defend themselves and their communities from violent rioters. Now, I will not condemn or condone. I would say the police need to do their jobs. But to put it simply, many people are now going to go out armed and they're not going to let the rioters burn down these cities. This means the Black Lives Matter riots and the violence, the chaos, the destruction that seeks to destroy our towns will be curtailed out of the fear being expressed by many of these individuals. Now, the media is still lying. And let's go through this, of course, with the breaking news that Kyle Rittenhouse is not guilty on all counts. But we'll take a look at the reactions, and I want to show you how the New York Times actually tried to cover this up and how they are engaged in what I would say is also grave constitutional violations. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com, become a member to support our writers. This story right here, breaking news, Kyle Rittenhouse found not guilty on all charges. We are sitting here, we are watching the feed, we are sweating bullets, waiting for that verdict, making sure we get it right. And not just on breaking news, but on other exclusive stories like one we have about Fauci and horrifying experiments that he's conducting. We cover news that we think is important and we fact check. And that's because you guys have become members, and that supports our ability to do this. The money that you give as a member, it's not absolutely for any of us about buying infinity pools or anything like that. It's about expanding the operation and fighting for liberty, for justice, for honesty. As a member, you'll get access to exclusive members-only segments like we had yesterday. And we're going to have an episode of The Green Room up tonight so you can see behind the scenes with several of our guests. But don't forget to like this video right now. Subscribe to this channel. Share this video right now with all your friends. Please, share this. Let people know what this is about. And I will break down some of the details of this case very simply so you understand. There may be many people who don't get why Kyle Rittenhouse was found not guilty. I will lay it out very simply. Now, that may not be enough. I've covered this extensively with sources and with evidence, but I'll break it down. So let's jump right in. From timcast.com, the jury's verdict was returned on November 19th, just after 12 p.m. Central Time. My friends, you will remember where you were. If you were watching this verdict, you will remember this day because it may lead to a dark path. I mean, it's good for us. It is. Kyle Rittenhouse was acting in self-defense, albeit maybe misguided, but he did not instigate or provoke. But there may be a dark path in that the recoil, the reaction from the extremists results in rioting, chaos, and destruction. But the recoil in that direction, the precedent set here may be that people stand up and say, we will not allow you in our communities. I believe the proper response is the refunding of police, not the refund like give them their money, but to fund them once again. Let's read. The judge reminded those in the courtroom reactions would not be permitted. The jury returned not guilty on all charges. First, Joseph Rosenbaum. Second, Richard McGinnis. Third, an unknown male. Fourth, Anthony Huber. And fifth, Gage Grosskreutz. When Rittenhouse was pronounced not guilty on the last charge involving Grosskreutz, he collapsed into his chair. He did. I have the video. I have the video right here. You can see. I'll just play it. You might not be able to hear it. It might sound wonky because we have the overhead speakers on.
Not guilty.
Members of the jury, these are your unanimous verdicts. Is there anyone who does not agree with the verdicts as read?
Kyle Rittenhouse collapses. He falls to the ground. He is lifted up, placed in the chair. He's hyperventilating. You can see his defense attorney, Shirafisi, saying, breathe. Or I'm assuming he's saying breathe, but he's motioning. Breathe. Breathe. That's what it looks like. I was nearly in tears. I kid you not. Other people were in tears. I get a message from some family members. They're saying they're crying right now. I was overwhelmed with joy. When I was watching this verdict come down live, when they announced the verdict was in, it would be announced shortly, my heart was going a million miles an hour. I look at my watch. Whew, it's got the heart rate monitor on it. I was sweating bullets. But the joke I made on Twitter was, if I'm sweating bullets, Kyle must be sweating 50 BMG. They said there was one verdict. And when they came out and said not guilty, I knew it. And Kyle Rittenhouse, as he heard one by one, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, he falls down. We're going to party tonight in Kyle Rittenhouse's for the verdict. And I hope Kyle Rittenhouse has a celebration with his friends and his family. I hope he cries tears of joy and freedom. And I certainly hope everyone who doesn't know why this happened, just please get better sources. But let me break down one by one on the counts as simply as I can for those that don't understand what happened. On the count of Joseph Rosenbaum, there are simple arguments and simple points that need to be made. Rosenbaum charged at Kyle Rittenhouse. Kyle ran from him. Rosenbaum had blast burns on his hand. Earlier in the night, it was testified to by state witnesses. I'm sorry. Early in the trial, state witnesses testified that in that night, Rosenbaum threatened Kyle Rittenhouse's life. Kyle Rittenhouse himself testified he once again threatened him to carve out his heart. Rather brutal. Now, I don't want anyone, I wish no one, I wish there was no harm, no injury. I think a reasonable person says that. There's a lot of people who are, I will just say, aggressive, perhaps rightly so, who demand justice. But for me, I wish this night didn't happen. I wish Kyle never had to go through this trial, and he shouldn't have, regardless of the night in question. But that's Rosenbaum. Richard McGinnis, a good friend of mine. He was a reporter in the vicinity. They charged Kyle with, I believe it was some form of reckless endangerment for potentially putting Richie in harm's way. The defense said, Richard McGinnis, we call him Richie, is a reporter who knew he was running into danger. In fact, Richie told us on Timcast IRL, our conversational show, something to the effect of, he's kind of a dummy. He ran towards the danger. That's what journalists do. Kyle cannot be held responsibility simply because someone else may have been rushing towards danger as per their job. And more importantly, the law stated, the defense's argument, that Kyle cannot be found to be reckless if he is acting in self-defense. Now, I don't know Richie's position. That's his private and personal view. And he is a friend of mine, a friend of the show. He's skated at my house on more than one occasion, and we're happy he's safe. But I will say this, as a friend of one of the purported victims, I suppose. They're not victims, but complaining witness, I guess. I don't think he was complaining, however you describe him. And a key witness of the state. I agree it was the right decision to find Kyle not guilty on that count. Again, I'll stress, I know Richie, he's a friend. I'm happy he's safe. It was dangerous, but this was the right call. I can't speak for him how he feels. For the unknown male, apparently this man was known to the prosecutor. He agreed to testify in exchange for immunity. They denied it. Well, this man jump kicked Kyle Rittenhouse. If the state wanted to bring that evidence forward and bring this man forward, they could have. They did not. Not guilty. Anthony Huber. This is where we have to have an important conversation, my friends. We have the story here from timcast.com. Girlfriend of man shot by Kyle Rittenhouse tells Timcast what she thinks justice would be. I want to read this for you. But I want to state, as I've always stated, I don't fault Anthony Huber. I really don't. And I'm really sad this happened to him. He attacked Kyle Rittenhouse. He was wrong to do so. He had no idea what was happening. He was part of a mob chasing down a young man, and they did not know why. There is no excuse for attacking someone with deadly force. There's a story going viral right now. A man lost his life after being hit in the head with a skateboard. Many people are posting memes about the Rittenhouse trial because of this. I know full well, as someone who's been a skateboarder for decades, don't come to me and tell me skateboards aren't dangerous. I know the stories. I know the stories of the missing teeth. People grab it by the truck, the metal part, and you can swing it. And it's got weight in the front from its other metal truck. Anthony Huber, in my opinion, was down there. I don't know why, perhaps supporting an idea or a protest, but it was a violent riot. I don't believe he attacked Kyle Rittenhouse for any reason, for any good reason. And I mean it. But he's not like Rosenbaum. Rosenbaum instigated a fight and threatened this kid's life on more than one occasion. My perspective of Anthony Huber was that he just was mindless. And I'm not saying that to be mean. I'm saying he heard a bunch of people saying, get him. And he sees a guy with a gun and he thinks, I'm going to grab him. I'm going to get him. He hits him twice. Now, you may say this guy's a criminal. He's got a history and all that stuff. And that's true. I'm not saying he's a good person. I'm saying in this regard, it wasn't like he was a violent criminal who was seeking to maliciously attack Kyle Rittenhouse. It was just mindless behavior. That being said, Kyle was absolutely entitled to defend himself from an attack that could have caused him great bodily harm or death. Anthony Huber grabbed Kyle's gun. He was holding the barrel. Kyle said he felt it being pulled. He fired. Anthony Huber lost his life, and I certainly, absolutely wish he did not. This is not Rosenbaum. Rosenbaum committed atrocities against children. Atrocities. Now, I believe that has some relevance to this case, but at this point, it's moot. Now, I want to show you just a few more counts before we go to the quote from his girlfriend. Gage Grosskreutz. Gage Grosskreutz testified that it wasn't until he advanced on Kyle with his gun pointed at him that Kyle fired. The defense tried to argue that Kyle didn't have to, but it was an absurd argument. And that's why he was found not guilty on that count. An armed man charging at you. You're certainly allowed to defend yourself. An exclusive from timcast.com. Girlfriend of man shot by Kyle Rittenhouse tells Timcast what she thinks justice would be. During a stunning interview with the New York Post on Thursday, Giddings admitted that she has sympathy for Rittenhouse despite her belief that he was running around the town trying to be king of the world. I do have a lot of sympathy for this kid because he is just a kid to me, so it would be a really dumb kid who unfortunately became the figurehead of this. Kenosha also needs to be held responsible for allowing this militia to show up and do exactly what they came here to do. What they came there to do was to stop the riots from destroying their community, which had been under siege. Let me show you. Elderly man defending store during Kenosha riots has broken jaw. I can't show you the video. It's graphic. It's horrifying. This poor man was trying to just stop people as they ransacked his store, and they bashed him in the face with a rock. And he's left laying on the ground, disoriented and bleeding. And this young man, Kyle Rittenhouse, sees this and says, I'm not all about that. He gets asked by a friend, do you want to come down and help? And he does. Now there's video apparently emerging showing that some of the people in question who asked those young men to come down were also out there that day. I don't know for sure exactly what happened, but let's read more. One of them goes out taking advantage of a vulnerable situation so that he can live out his fantasy of being king of the world, and one of them out there doing absolutely nothing. Nothing effing wrong and being presented with, yes, an active shooter situation. Now, she's wrong about that. She's absolutely wrong about that. Well, she's entitled to believe so, but it's not correct. Kyle Rittenhouse was running towards the police. Well, let me show you what she said. Cassandra Fairbanks, who is editor-in-chief here at timcast.com, said, I just watched your interview, which was actually pretty moving, particularly since you acknowledge that he's just a kid. I am wondering, though, what do you think justice would be? Life in prison? Less? What do you think would be fair? The girlfriend of Anthony Huber stated, to me, justice would be this kid growing up, finding love and family as beautiful as Anthony and I had, then him realizing exactly what was taken from us and feeling that fully. I don't wish this on anyone. That's amazing. That's a beautiful statement. I don't believe justice is putting someone in prison for the most part. Some people we need to lock up, but it's not so much about justice. I believe that certain people, maybe Rosenbaum, who committed atrocities against children, should be locked up and probably indefinitely because they're a harm to themselves and others. And you see what happens. As for Kyle Rittenhouse and for other, for many crimes, including victimless crimes and violent crimes, we have to ask ourselves, depending on the severity of the crime, if we're serving justice by simply locking them up and forgetting about them. Is there a better way? Rehabilitation instead of retribution? Well, let me show you a little bit of what's going on here. The reaction from the left. Fascist judge needs to read the Constitution. Adopting Hitler's enemy of the people line is not a good look right now. Yikes. Freaky stuff. There's more. We have this one from Hassan Piker. Well, there it is. The Rittenhouse precedent. Hassan had stated before that he feared a precedent if the right was able to, if Kyle Rittenhouse won, that the right would be able to go out and defend themselves. I mean, that's basically how he stated it. You know, the way he framed it was kind of that vigilantes would come out and they'd feel emboldened. But what's he really saying here? Kyle Rittenhouse was found not guilty. And basically what he's saying is that the precedent is you can be safe to render aid to protesters like Kyle Rittenhouse did, to those he probably didn't even, I don't think he agreed or disagreed for the most part with them. I think he was just there to keep the peace. He wanted to be a cop. The real precedent here is that you can render aid to those who are protesting and even rioting. And if you have to defend yourself, we will not imprison you for it. We have this from Andy No. Tanya James of Arkansas says that Kyle Rittenhouse should have been killed. She says Kyle should have never made it to trial. Bring that bee to my neck of the mother effing woods, I'd imagine what she was going for. Joy Reid. We knew, but it's helpful to remind ourselves how America was designed to work. Yeah. In response, one woman says, I know where I stand. Honestly terrifying, though. Any protest now will be met with armed counter-protesters, assuming they won't be held accountable for their actions if they just provoke the crowd first. But Kyle didn't do that. We know he didn't do that. We have this from Brennan Chapman. The President of the United States and several members of Congress called an innocent child a white supremacist and terrorist. They did. The ACLU, disgusting, dangerous, disgusting, unacceptable white supremacy. We have this from Mayor Bill de Blasio. Anthony Hooper and Joseph Rosenbaum are victims. They should be alive today. Well, the jury found that they were actually assailants. He says the only reason they're not is because of a violent, dangerous man chose to take a gun across state lines and start shooting people. To call this a miscarriage of justice is an understatement. I hope Kyle Rittenhouse sues each and every one. I believe Kyle Rittenhouse will never have to work a day in his life after this. This is a fresh statement. November 19th. The fact is Kyle Rittenhouse never took a gun across state lines. And it's easily proven if you just watched the court case. Dominic Black is being criminally charged for the straw purchase because he gave the gun to Kyle Rittenhouse in Wisconsin. Mayor Bill de Blasio didn't pay attention. Jordan Chamberlain tweeted, I'm shocked that Rittenhouse didn't get convicted after this hard-hitting and persuasive argument from the prosecutor. Jordan, of course, being an excellent reporter and a good friend of us in the show. And she shows what Binger stated to the court. This video to me was one of the most shocking videos I have ever seen. Binger says that all Rosenbaum did that night of the shooting was tip over a porta potty with no one in it, light a dumpster on fire, swing a chain, tip over a trailer, set it on fire, and repeatedly say the N-word. That to me was shocking, and I felt like we would get a not guilty on all counts verdict immediately after this alone. Rosenbaum flipped over a porta potty, set fire to a dumpster, was pushing it towards a gas station, was swinging a chain around, threatened the life of Kyle Rittenhouse more than once, flipped a truck over in the street, a trailer. I was told that Drew Hernandez, a witness and who testified in this trial, told me they set a garbage truck on fire. And when he said this, I'm like, this is shocking to me. Is this supposed to be like it's not a big deal? Remarkably, in a pre-trial hearing, he said the same thing. It was just arson. And the judge said, are you kidding me? Just arson? What is this? I'm surprised these charges were allowed to move forward. And now we have this. The darkest of these stories. Now, we're going to go more in depth on this one later tonight because this is a story that I think may get glossed over, but please, please, please share this. This may be one of the most important stories out of the whole Kyle Rittenhouse circumstance, scenario, whatever. We have won the battle. Kyle Rittenhouse is free. He's not guilty. But there is a war. Figurative, cold, whatever you want to call it. In this article from Barry Weiss's Substack, in this segment written by Nellie Bolis, let me read this for you and shock you to your core. You must share this. Whether verbally or on paper or write a story about it. I don't care how you do. I'm not saying just this video. You can share this video if you'd like, but it's 20 minutes in. Click the share button. Click the timestamp. Let people know this. A note on Kenosha in light of the Kyle Rittenhouse trial. Until quite recently, the mainstream liberal argument was that burning down businesses for racial justice was both good and healthy. Burnings allowed for the expression of righteous rage, and the businesses all had insurance to rebuild. Many liberal Democrat types tried rejecting this premise, but there is an article called In Defense of Looting from years ago in Ferguson. Nellie is not wrong about this. Now, it may not have been the majority, I believe every single one, absolutely, but it was the majority. People were saying this is racial justice. They were saying this is an expression of our rage. Chris Cuomo said, since when are protests supposed to be peaceful? MSNBC stood in front of a burning police station and said, hey, but it's mostly peaceful. Check this out. When I was at the New York Times, I went to Kenosha to see about this, and it turned out not to be true. The part of Kenosha that people burned in the riots was the poor multiracial commercial district, full of small, underinsured cell phone shops and car lots. It was very sad to see and to hear from people who had suffered. Beyond this financial loss, small storefronts are quite meaningful to their owners and communities, which continuously baffles the Zoom class. Something odd happened. with that story after I filed it. It didn't run. It sat and sat. Now, it could be that the piece was just bad. I've sent in bad ones before, and I'll do it again. A few weeks after I filed, an editor told me the Times wouldn't be able to run my Kenosha insurance debacle piece until after the 2020 election. So sorry. There was a variety of reasons given: space, timing, tweaks here or there. Eventually, the election passed. Biden was in the White House, and my Kenosha story ran. However, the reason for holding the piece, covering the suffering and the riots, was not a priority. The reality that brought Kyle Rittenhouse into the streets was one we reporters were meant to ignore. The old man who tried to put out a blaze at Kenosha and had his jaw broken. The top editor of the Philadelphia Inquirer had to resign in June 2020 amid a staff outcry for publishing a piece with the headline, "Buildings Matter Too." If you lived in those neighborhoods on fire, you were not supposed to get an extinguisher. The proper response, the only acceptable response, was to see the brick and mortar torn down, to watch the fires burn and say, thank you. There was a man in Minnesota. He's a firefighter, a family man. He was a black American. Not that I think it matters, but certainly I think it matters to those who claim to fight for racial justice. It was his dream to have a sports bar. I feel that, man. My family had a business when I was a kid. We had a cafe. We had a venue. I understand that feeling. A place to call your own. To serve up good meals to the community. To have a laugh and to watch the game. To have community. I watched that video where he cried. When they burned, they ransacked his building first. He shows up the next day. He's crying. His dream was ripped away from him. It was destroyed. Not to mention the lives lost. Well, that comes first for sure. But the lives of these people were considered meaningless. With the 25 dead in the George Floyd riots, this man's dream, his life was meaningless. David Dorn, retired police captain in Philadelphia. I believe Philadelphia. During the riots, went to his friend's pawn shop because the alarm went off. He was shot in the chest and killed. On live stream. Over a TV. This man's dream in Minnesota, he ended up raising over $1 million. Man, that warmed my heart. I hope he lives well. I don't know what he's done with it, but I hope he does whatever he wants. He deserves it. These people may not all be evil, but they're like zombie hordes. They destroy. They burn. When the man came back to his business after it was ransacked and gave an interview, people were actively stealing his safe. When he came back again, the building had been completely destroyed. No insurance would cover this. And the conundrum in Minnesota was that the cost of rubble removal was greater than the insurance would pay out. Nellie Bolis of the New York Times had that story and said, I want the American people to know what is happening to the working class, to the poor, multiracial communities. And they said no. Because Donald Trump might win the election. Not verbatim. But as the story goes, they would not run the piece until after the election. We know exactly why. It's nightmarish, man. It's horrifying. And right now, the New York Times is defying a court order to stop publishing privileged communications from Project Veritas. You may not be a fan of Project Veritas. I am. Now, maybe you're not. That's fine. The FBI raided Project Veritas's headquarters, I believe. But I know they raided Project Veritas, James O'Keefe's home and many of their journalists, and they seized their electronic devices. Shortly thereafter, the New York Times came into possession of privileged communications. That is, one of the rights we hold most dear is your right to counsel. James O'Keefe was talking with his lawyers about how to operate. The New York Times published those communications while actively in a lawsuit with Project Veritas. Project Veritas sued the New York Times for defamation. Now, it is widely believed, and I think it's fair to say, the FBI leaked those communications to the New York Times. The New York Times is actively defying a court order not to publish them. Because the New York Times is evil. These people are evil people. These are evil institutions. MSNBC right now, and the whole time, has been putting out falsely framed information to convince you and your friends that Kyle Rittenhouse was an evil white supremacist. Look at what Mayor Bill de Blasio said. Cross state lines? Are you kidding? Not even Hassan Piker believes he crossed state lines with a gun. But that's what de Blasio said. Even the leftists who are angry know certain things aren't true. So why are they lying to you? I mean, perhaps for political power, like Nellie Bolas's story. Perhaps it was all about winning an election. There's potentially going to be riots because the verdict came down on a Friday, and I talked about this yesterday. Now, my prediction was a mistrial with prejudice on a Friday, and there will be riots because the judge intervening would be dark. I'm scared of this, of the results. We've won the battle, but not the war. And in many ways, we've taken great losses. The state introduced evidence that was not to be admitted. The state questioned the Fifth Amendment rights of the defendant on the stand in front of the jury, violating his constitutional rights, a grave constitutional violation. They appear to have tampered with evidence and provided false evidence. And now we have another story of them withholding evidence, and they got away with it. Just because you've won the race doesn't mean we don't ban the cheaters. Imagine this. Imagine you're watching an Olympic 100-meter dash, and there's a guy with a jetpack on. There's another guy running. And the guy with the jetpack is real close to winning, and he's just rocketing across the ground, not even running. And the actual athlete wins by a hair. And then the ref comes out and says, "Look, we know this guy is cheating, but because you won, it doesn't matter anyway, does it?" No, it does matter. A message must be sent. And that being said, as much as I did want a mistrial with prejudice, it's a really good outcome that the jury said not guilty on all counts. That'll send a message to all of the people who want to protect their communities. It'll send a message to all the people who want to vandalize, destroy, burn, loot, and murder. It is not okay. And to those who want to protect their communities, you have a right to do so. But please, just think through before you go out there with a weapon. Kyle shouldn't have been there. He really shouldn't have. But I'm not saying that I fault him for doing so. I'm saying no one should have been. The rioters shouldn't have been. The police should have been. We got a lot to talk about tonight and a lot to go through. But this is amazing stuff. Thank you all so much for watching as I covered this trial. Thank you all so much for watching Timcast IRL as we interviewed 7 different witnesses to the night in question. And thank you to everybody who prayed and had faith and who wished wholeheartedly, whether religious or otherwise, that Kyle Rittenhouse would be found not guilty. Tears of joy are to be shed tonight, and we'll have a drink in honor of America, that justice prevailed. Rightly so. Thank you all so much for watching. Check out Timcast IRL tonight, youtube.com/Timcast IRL at 8 p.m. This is going to be one interesting conversation, and we'll see you all there again. Thank you all so much.